The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, Cloud Complexities, Navigating the Headwinds. My name is Jessica Gallus of SANS, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speaker is Serge Borso, SANS instructor and founder and CEO of SpiderSec. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenter, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be made available for viewing and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Serge.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I appreciate that. My name is Serge Borso, and I am looking forward to today's conversation about cloud complexities. When I originally envisioned this talk, I wasn't really sure exactly what I wanted to say or who really my intended audience was going to be. Plus the fact that even now, I don't know who all of you are who are listening to me. You could be a manager, you could be an engineer, I don't know. So what I'll tell you right now is where I ended up with this talk is focused at a higher level and kind of more the managerial decision-making approach or target audience, if you will, I guess. And with that, you should know I'm not really going to be delving into anything in terms of technical detail or like command line type of level here. So this will be much higher level. And I think the reason why it shows that was because of the message I'm trying to communicate. And hopefully that'll be clear as I go through this. So with that backdrop, we'll go ahead and get into this. So who am I? My name is Serge Borso. I have a little bubble now. So if you Google my name, something actually comes up. And it's there for a couple different reasons. Number one, there's only one person in the world named Serge Borso, in case you didn't know. Now you know. And I'm a published author. I've been teaching with SANS for about 6 years now, quite some time, quite frankly. And I've learned a lot over those 6 years with SANS as an instructor. Other than that, I have about 15 or so years of experience in the cybersecurity or information security community, working for small, actually medium to larger sized companies and enterprises, doing things like penetration testing and security awareness training and threat and vulnerability management. And later on, some things specific to cloud and moving to the cloud and doing some cost benefit analyses to figure out if that's the smartest thing to do and what that going to equate to in terms of return on investment, security, training, expertise, having the right team to make sure that what we're getting ourselves into we can handle, and understanding all of the things that go along with it. And that will definitely be a big basis for the conversation today. Other than that background, I am the CEO and founder of SpiderSec, and we focus on offensive security, penetration testing, and the like, cybersecurity consulting essentially. So definitely check us out. And the other thing I'd like to say here is, depending what you get out of this webinar, it may really speak to you, or it may not. I don't know. That's really for you to decide. But I do want to be clear that the conversation doesn't have to end here or be one-sided. Even at the end, I'll take some questions and so on. But I am available on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active. I don't tweet very often, but the point is, you can feel free to reach out if you'd like to continue the conversation. I'm definitely available and want to make that clear. So what's the purpose of this? I'm going to discuss briefly some issues that have cropped up in the last 3 years, 3 months. as pertains to the quote-unquote cloud. And what I'm going to try to highlight is the fact that there's a lot of ways to make mistakes, and there's a lot of ways that, depending on your team or your company's level of expertise, you can end up in a situation where you have more issues than maybe you anticipated. I want to then move on and talk about how to learn from some of these mistakes that were made by other companies, and then hopefully leave you with some fair amount of guidance as it pertains to what to actually do. So when I do a webinar or other public speaking events, I typically like to provide some key takeaways, depending on the nature of the conversation and what the talk is about. But generally, that's the goal. I don't want to just inundate you with useless facts or talk about how these companies had some epic fails or whatever. I really want to hopefully leave you with, here's something actionable that you can do that's going to be beneficial for you, your team, your company, your transition to the cloud, your current cloud offering, or whatever the case may be specific to you. So that's my goal, and that's what I'm going to work to try to do. So we'll start with looking at a few of the mistakes, and we see one date on here of 2017. The WWE had a leak. There was the Verizon breach. 14 million of us that use Verizon were impacted by that, including phone numbers, account pins. The Dow Jones data leak. Leak. That's funny. Called a leak. Is that a breach? Is that a compromise? Is it a leak? Are you going to get fined for it? How about that? And that's going to help dictate what you want to call it. I would call that an incident. If you have to invoke the IRP, that's an incident. And the press can call it what they want to, but us here in the security realm hopefully have a pretty good understanding. That's what we call an incident. You invoke your incident response plan, and you have to deal with the fallout from it. And of course, there's a FedEx example. Another day, another exposed Amazon S3 server. This talk is not specifically revolving around Amazon, although as the primary cloud provider out there, just based on the reality of the situation of AWS being kind of the 900-pound gorilla in the room, so to speak, we will be talking a little bit more about Amazon. But this is just meant to show you that it's not the main cloud provider. Google and Azure and others also suffer from the same issue of having problems. So if Azure has issues, even Microsoft itself isn't like a user of their cloud screwed something up. This is Microsoft themselves making a mistake that caused an exposure. Was this an accidental exposure? An accidental exposure of 250 million customer support records. Okay. And note, I'm not going into the details and doing the case study. Here's what happened. No, that's not necessary at this point. We have a March 11th, 2011 date down here. So this is, what, 7, 8 months ago. The server didn't store direct scans of fingerprints, but binary code that hackers could use to recreate them with potentially disastrous consequences. And we have the source code. We have a little bit of details about the breach. The company neglected to password protect a database on the cloud, maybe in the cloud, or properly encrypt it. This is almost certainly the result of human error on the part of the IT staff. So a human screwed something up. We don't blame the technology. We blame the human for making a mistake, which is fair. You'll see when we talk about S3 buckets, that is definitely something I'm a proponent of. Not blaming people per se, but pointing kind of the finger where it needs to be pointed at, not blaming the technology. It can be wielded properly or improperly. And you as a human can make a mistake, or you as a human can properly secure your storage or your API or whatever the case may be. So this is another breach, and this was, as I mentioned, just earlier this year. Here's a quick example. And we have a date here of March 17th, 2020. So once again, same time frame. 500,000 documents exposed in an open S3 bucket incident. This one's called an incident. That's nice. They have the proper terminology. Looks like it was first uncovered in December 2019. The AWS S3 bucket was not using any form of encryption, authentication, or access credentials. A situation which has become increasingly common as many companies move to cloud services. It's not necessary, to call out the name of the company or even necessarily the technology. The point with these few slides here, and as I said, I'm going to try to make this, this section a little bit brief, that mistakes are made. And whether that's 500,000 documents or 43,000 documents or 100,000 fingerprints and biometric information, it's all just dependent on the business that you're in and the implementation of your cloud offering. Now, the title of this talk, related to complexities, is where I definitely want to focus more time of this conversation, talking about how that complexity really is one of the root causes of the security shortcomings. But there's more. That's March. What else do we have? July 6th, another open S3 bucket exposes 1 million files. Okay. 99,000 people associated with the fitness brand's customers. The AWS bucket, whose URL contained reshred and which contained files with the company's logo and other identifiers, was completely open to the public, per the researchers. As a penetration tester, I can tell you firsthand, owning a company and performing penetration tests for Fortune 500 companies and the like, this is not uncommon. These are the type of breaches I'm highlighting because they made it to the news. Maybe you saw this and read about this depending on what your daily routine consists of and what type of news you're consuming. Maybe you didn't hear about these. The point is that there's a lot more of this stuff happening all the time that goes unreported. These are the people that got caught. These are the companies who are now paying fines for some of these breaches. There's plenty of other companies out there where there's a less than reputable researcher who finds the exact same thing and now uses that data dump to cause harm to the business or the victims of that breach. And it doesn't go reported. It goes used. Used as in your PII, your sensitive information, access to the server that was compromised is now used as part of a much deeper attack against the organizations and its users. And that won't be found out for another, well, what does the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report tell us? How many months is it going to take for those to be identified? And when it is identified, will that company even come forward and tell us about it? Time will tell. It happens to all of us. Not all of us, but even companies who are putting a lot of effort into doing things correct can still fall victim to an attack, whether it's spear phishing, which certainly is much more common than an S3 bucket type of vulnerability or poor configuration more specifically. It does happen to a lot of us though. So we have to be careful with how we set things up. And I'm not the type of person who shies away from having that conversation. Be clear about that. So what's the point here with all this? What actually happened? And I'm going to argue that the root cause of some of those previously identified breaches I just showed you really comes down to lack of understanding of what's occurring in your own infrastructure. RTFM. What happens when we actually do read the fine manual? Well, we see things like what you see here on the screen. There's some C#, there's some Java, there's some SDK information, there's an Amazon CLI, there's some IAM documentation about how to set up an S3 bucket within your identity and access management provider service. There's, well, I don't know. What is it? What happens when you read all this manual, all this content? There's seriously 967 pages as it pertains to S3 buckets and storage information, and some ancillary information about how to secure it, set it up, and tune it, and access it via your API or via lambda function or via any other serverless architecture or within Kubernetes or within whatever. What's the point? That's a lot. That's a lot of information for anyone to consume and fully grasp, to fully understand how the intricacies of your IAM roles and your Kubernetes environment and your cloud formation and Terraform and all the other special buzzword bingo words that you may come across, how all this stuff actually works. The complexity of setting something up such that it does what you want it to do and does so in a secure fashion. That's hard to do. Quite frankly, it's difficult to do. Even when you do read the manual, who has time for 967 pages of a manual? Not most people in the IT environments that I know. Okay, it's like we have other things to do. Okay, we have implementation, we have go lives, we have incidents to deal with. There's a lot of work that goes into offering the solutions that we offer at our companies. And as far as standing up something like a simple storage container, it should be a rather straightforward task. And I'm not trying, I don't want to overcomplicate this, because simply setting up a storage container in AWS is not arguably that challenging. It's when you have 1,000 machines and multiple VPCs and 20 IAM roles and so on and so forth. Now we're talking that relatively, arguably simple task now gets stretched out to the point where it's like, how do I do this in a secure fashion? How am I doing this such that it works and it's secure? And that's what I would say is really the most important piece of this. And I think a lot of you would agree with me. Is what we're trying to accomplish being accomplished? Is our service online? Is it working? Check that box. Yes, we're good to go. Is it done so in a secure fashion? And that's, from a SANS perspective, as a penetration tester, as someone who teaches people about how to secure applications and cloud components and perform penetration testing, that's really what my focus is always about, is security. It's definitely about security. But from a business perspective, that's not always the case. Because most businesses are in the business of making money, being profitable, and having a quality service, this cost center of IT and security is sometimes glossed over to the point where it's like we'll put the bare minimum amount of resources required to get the job done. So the first checkbox may be checked. The website or the API or the infrastructure is up and running and it's working. But who is securing it? And who is going through and putting the time and effort into ensuring that what we have is being done right? It depends. As I mentioned, this isn't some drawn out story about S3 buckets. That's not the point. I want to talk about the complexity of these cloud components and how that fundamentally breeds insecurity. There might be better terminology for that, but we'll go with that for now. So what do we do about this stuff? It does get complicated. This is a screenshot of a Lambda shell where you can Google this yourself and read more into it. But in essence, even a serverless architecture that's just there to execute commands can cause significant issues if it's not set up properly. And that's I don't know, it's kind of like an easy thing to say. It's a pretty straightforward statement. Yeah, if you don't set this up right, it can cause problems. Yeah, of course, that's pretty obvious. I guess maybe a more poignant point to make would be along the lines of this conversation, who set this up? Why did they set this up? What was the purpose of moving to a serverless architecture? Is it worth it? Is it worth the time? Is it worth the money? Is it just another cool feature that we can play with? And now, oh, this is a solution to our problem because it works and it's there and it's cheap. But how does it actually work? Who set this up? Why was it set up? What experience and knowledge did that person or that team actually have with doing this? It's just the first time this was ever done within your company? If so, how do you know you're doing it the right way? Oh, because you read the manual, right? The 967-page manual. Yeah, sure. And by the way, that gets updated. And when there's a new version or deprecated service, yeah, it gets complicated. There's all these complexities we have to deal with. Back in 2012, when the advent of the cloud was still in the precipice of mainstream, I might argue, these are a few of the bullet points that you may have come across. You have cost savings. So taking a step back, I, once again, don't know all the details of this audience. Some of you may be taking a serious look at migrating to the cloud. Some of you may have been in the cloud for a decade already. Is that true? Yeah, maybe not a decade, but a while. We'll talk about that too briefly. And others may just be here to, kind of hear what I have to say about this topic. So I don't really know, but I can say that there's definitely some awesome components of the cloud, this quote unquote cloud, and there's some drawbacks as well. I'm not going to try to be negative about any of this stuff, which may seem counterintuitive once we keep on going through some of the slides I have here, but I'm not anti-cloud in any way. I'm a huge proponent of using someone else's architecture to perform your compute cycles. Here's some of the things that we used to be sold on though. Ease of use, cost savings, increased automation, storage capacity, flexibility, scalability, freeing up your IT staff. Yeah, right. Yeah, so 8 years ago, 8.5 or so years ago, those were some of the selling points of quote unquote moving to the cloud. The reality, I think, some of that stuff holds up very strong. You definitely have flexibility and scalability and agility. I don't know if I count agility as this isn't the Olympics, but you definitely have the ability to scale up and down and the flexibility for handling load very, very well across multiple regions of the United States or other countries, and quality integration of content delivery networks and static storage components. And yeah, you get a lot of that stuff. Ease of use, I would not argue necessarily in the case of ease of use. Certainly a component of your cloud service provider where you can log in to your browser and click some buttons and get things set up for the most part. In some situations, at least if to scratch the surface, you can do that. For anything more complex though, ease of use, I don't think is still a selling point here. Any cloud engineer will tell you, or you can just watch over their shoulder when they're doing their work, and you can quickly realize that there's nothing easy about the complex environment that we're dealing with in the cloud. Cost savings, I don't know that I would agree with that either. Depending what you're trying to accomplish, I'm seeing it both ways. I'm seeing some solutions are just outrageously way more expensive, and for other scalable environments to auto scale with your load capacity, that's different. And there's definitely some potential cost savings associated with that. But there's downsides, and you certainly are not freeing up your IT staff. I'm gonna call BS on that, but maybe that's just my opinion. The other thing here is you've given up control at this point. I'm not a control freak. Yeah, maybe I am. When it comes to cybersecurity and IT, I think I am more of the controlling type of person where I want to have the power to control my destiny. If there's going to be an outage or something's going to be screwed up, I want that to be on me. I don't want to be in a position where I can't be blaming someone else. If something goes down or something's broken, that's on me. That's kind of the way I look at it. When we move to the cloud, or we're in the quote unquote cloud, if we're using Amazon's or Google's or Microsoft servers, well, that's no longer arguably our infrastructure. We have a virtualized environment that's running in a data center in a largely undisclosed location, or multiple, mostly undisclosed locations throughout the country, or other countries you may be operating in. You can certainly find out where these data centers are at. That's not the point. The point is you have to rely upon someone else's machines and someone else's processes and someone else's expertise. And when we're talking about billion-dollar companies with data centers underneath the ocean, that's cool. It's like, yeah, there's a level of trust that comes along with this. Is Microsoft or Amazon or IBM or Google or other companies like this, are they competent? Sure. Are they massive in size and scale and have levels of expertise and depth of knowledge? Without a doubt. Without a doubt. But you don't have the control over the situation when one of their engineers pushes a faulty route and their BGP settings are messed up. That's not something you can control. Now, a mature organization taking a serious look at cloud migration, or moving to the cloud, or who may already be in the cloud right now with some on-prem solutions as well, you account for that. The maturity of, I've been there, I've suffered an outage, AWS does go down. You've been there, and you realize, yeah, there's some awesome luxuries that the cloud affords us, but we're not going to put all of our eggs in that basket. As good as these companies are, we're pretty good too, and your IT team, and knowing what your customers need, and so on and so forth, all comes into play. So when we do move to the quote cloud, maybe I should keep putting quotes around this. In my mind, it's like you see the little picture of the kid asking his dad, what are clouds made of? Dad says, oh, mostly Linux servers. That's the way I look at it. It's the cloud's mostly other people's machines that you're just simply renting CPU cycles on. But of course, there's more complexity than that, and that's the whole purpose of this conversation. But that's really what we're talking about here. So we have some granular identity and access management. Awesome, that's so exciting. But now we have granular IAM, and that's a full-time position right there. Depending how big your company is, this could be a whole team of people that handles identity and access management. Quite literally. Quite literally. All right, how about container and orchestration? Kubernetes, cool. Docker containers, that's great. Who's going to learn about this? Because this isn't how we did it 5 years ago. So now we have a whole new level of expertise. And this is not good or bad. This is reality. Those of us who work in IT and security, we know that you never stop learning. You don't get stagnant. You don't stop going to webinars like this and learning new things and new technologies. That's the way of IT, the way of the world. You keep up or you get left behind. So I'm not saying, oh, we're moving to Kubernetes and it's new technology, so that's scary, we shouldn't do it. I'm saying it takes expertise to learn that new technology and the ins and outs of it. That's what I'm saying. That's my point here. 5 nines uptime, yeah, we had 5 nines before. 5 nines is nothing new. That's not like it's a great selling point in my opinion. And I'm not sold on the ease of use at all. Pricing, it depends. This is a screenshot from Google, and we have 2 virtual CPUs with 8 gigs of RAM for a monthly price of about $50. How is that a good value? I don't think it necessarily is. You can do the calculation yourself, leveraging someone else's computers certainly may make a lot of sense for you depending what you're trying to accomplish. And it may beat having a rack in a co-location with a bunch of your own physical hardware and the depreciation that comes along with that, or the depreciation, I should say, of value, and the electricity, and the ISP costs. Yeah, sure. And I'm probably preaching to the choir. The point is, it may not actually be cheaper in the cloud compared to what you have right now. And of course, this is just a one-time screenshot here. Amazon's different, Azure is different. Other cloud providers have much cheaper prices or more expensive, depending, once again, what you're trying to accomplish. Do you need bare bones physical machines? Are you okay with a shared computing environment? What does the nature of your business dictate is requirements? And that's going to help guide you to answer some of these questions of where should our servers reside at and what level of security is appropriate for our own risk tolerance and our own service offering that we provide. Uptime, security, the tech, what services are available. We have Google, Microsoft, and AWS screenshots here, all of them with outages. The middle one, the Microsoft outage, what is this? September 29th, 2020. And I just modified that 2 months ago. So we're talking about the cloud for a decade. And oh yeah, AWS, and now there's an Azure offering, and Google has its compute environment. Awesome. And even the big billion-dollar companies make mistakes. The AWS outage that broke, I wouldn't say it broke the internet by any means. It certainly caused some issues. Tuesday's mayhem resulted from a mistake during a routing debugging exercise. Okay. Yeah. Networking is difficult. Everything we're doing here is difficult. There's layers of abstraction that your console within AWS or your cloud provider will provide for you. But generally speaking, this isn't like it's easy to do. So some of the issues I have, of course, are around security and the learning curve, really, that we have to ensure our employees are going through, so they know what to expect and what skills that they've historically gained over the years are going to translate well to a cloud environment. And I have to say, I mean, the majority of the stuff that an engineer or an analyst may be doing right now was directly going to translate just fine to any other environment. It's irrelevant. If your application is hosted in Amazon or if your application is hosted in your garage, it's irrelevant. It's still using the same technology stack, right? It's a LAMP stack or a Windows stack or whatever it is. So it doesn't really matter where it resides at. What does change is now the orchestration and the automation and the level of access to that machine. What I mean by that is, while the underlying technology is similar regardless of where your service resides at, the way you may interact with that or enable that service to perform higher level functions does change. And that's where that learning curve plays a real role. So let's shift this conversation to a new direction and talk about some other things here. So we have a few bullet points that I want to delve into here: people, training, depth, simplicity, and the ownership and control components of this. So let's talk about people first. Who are those people? Those aren't even really people. It's a fun fact. This person is on exist.com. Yeah, technology's gone pretty far. Those look like humans to me, but apparently those are not actually real people. But I don't know. I didn't read the article that deep. But I did go to this person is on exist.com, and that page, you refresh the page, you get another, I believe it's an AI generated image of a person. Perhaps neither here nor there. The part I want to talk about is the people as it pertains to your cloud offering and what choices you're going to make, what direction you're going to choose to go in. So moving to or running in the cloud does not necessarily mean reduced headcount. That's something I want to highlight and talk about for a moment. The concept that we can move to the cloud and get rid of our IT staff is something I've heard. I've heard that discussed. I've worked at companies during that shift from Amazon gaining prominence in the cloud service provider industry or space, and the companies I was working with at the time looking seriously in that direction of let's move all of our stuff to AWS and get out of this data center, this physical data center that we have our machines in. And our whole service offering is just going to be in AWS. And sitting in on those executive management meetings and hearing them banter back the idea that, well, we can just get rid of all these people now. All these people who would provision the server in the data center, or all the people who would set up the networking and the firewall rules and the intrusion prevention systems. It's like, oh, it's all virtualized now. It sits in the cloud. We just need one cloud person. They can do it all, right? And then to see that gradually shift over the weeks and months and years after the fact, because we did definitely move. We moved that whole product line, that whole business unit, if you will, to AWS. There was no longer any on-prem physical machines data center that we owned anymore for that whole business unit. It did happen. It took over a year, and the amount of people actually increased twofold, heads up on that, to support that. So that person running cables may not exist, but the person who has a networking background certainly does. Now, instead of firewall rules, they're security groups, and that's another full-time job potentially, depending how big your environment is. And now we have, instead of what we call like a Linux guru, we have an orchestration engineer, and you just shift it. This is the same concept of when the iPhone came out and the Android operating system came out, and it started gaining that in popularity many years ago. The shift in the industry created jobs we never would have envisioned 20 or 30 years ago. A mobile app developer. What is that 30 years ago? It's nothing. It's non-existent. An infrastructure orchestration engineer. What is that 30 years ago? I don't know, but I know what it is now. I know what it is now. And I think that's with this backdrop of the conversation about this whole business unit shifting to the quote unquote cloud, we had those conversations. At first it was, we're going to get rid of a bunch of people because we don't need them anymore. And it shifted to, oh, we have whole new job roles that we're creating to support this cloud migration. And now we're live in the cloud, and we used to have 7 people. Now we've got 14 or 20 people supporting this. Interesting. As far as this little blurb about IBM, there was this meme. I was looking for the meme when I was creating this slide deck, and I couldn't find it. It always pops up in my LinkedIn feed, but I apparently never took a screenshot of it. It was this pretty funny thing I thought about how this company is trying to hire someone who has 7 years of experience with Kubernetes and 5 years of experience with some other technology, and they want some front-end development experience. There's like 10 different things, and the meme says this isn't a one-person job. This is a 7-person IT environment. That's what you're asking for. So this is close to what I was trying to convey here with this IBM Global Technology Services. And they just posted this, in June? No, that's not right. They posted this just a few months ago, IBM did. Minimum 12 plus years experience with Kubernetes. Yeah, you can't get that. It hasn't existed for that long. Technology does change a lot, and trying to keep up with it is part of the challenge that I'm trying to speak to, trying to drop some knowledge on that. training education. So you're taking this webinar. Hopefully you're getting some value out of it. Ideally, that would be my desire. You've maybe taken some SANS training, the best you can get right there. You have some hands-on experience. Maybe you're already in the cloud, and this whole free tier account is what you started with, the AWS free tier. And for a good solid year, you had your little T2 micro instance and your 10, 20 gigs of RAM, or sorry, 10, 20 gigs of hard drive space, and you just had your EC2 instance, and you got to poke around and learn the ins and outs of some of the free tier services that you could interact with. And then you started getting charged for it, and you're like, oh, I don't know if it's still worth the money, saying $30 a month for a T2 micro instance, and you could just go to another cloud hosting provider, spend $5 a year on it, but I digress. Experience, education, training, using technology. This is one of the big takeaways here. Depending where you're at in your cloud migration, if it's something you're thinking about, or maybe you've already done it, this training and education doesn't stop. Okay, and if you're thinking about what to do and maybe what cloud provider to go with, know that there are free tiers. There is no shortage of free material online available for you and your team, or the team that you are managing, to get their hands dirty, so to speak. Get a hands-on experience of how to provision a machine, how to set up security groups or firewall rules, how to access that machine in the cloud, how to provision or spin it up, spin it down, how to automate that, how to use a lambda or serverless function to respond to an HTTP or API request that then performs some other action, depending what you're trying to accomplish. And just, like I said, getting a hands-on experience of what all of the service options your cloud provider of choice provides for you. That's a huge, huge takeaway from this whole talk is there are free resources that exist right now that you can use to learn more about what makes sense for you and your company. And if there's a cost savings benefit, if there's other serious pros versus the cons, that's going to point you in one direction over the other. So that's definitely something I want to highlight. Depth and expertise is another thing here. How do you become an expert with CloudFront or Terraform or the other things in the bullet points there? There's no better way, in my opinion, than going figuratively back one slide and just focusing in on the education piece to this. It depends what type of learner you actually are. If you're getting something from this webinar, maybe you're like an audio learner or a visual learner. If you need to take it to the next level, that's where, once again, getting that account access into your cloud provider of choice, or even multiple cloud providers, to answer the question of which one suits you best, then taking that to the next level of, well, all these little bullet points right here where I'm talking about stuff you may have never even heard of, Grafana, Cloud Mapper, Front Door, delving into each one of these and figuring out which ones are of use to you, which ones can be used or leveraged in your environment, and which ones you're like, okay, I know the name now, but I'm never going to use it, type of thing. The depth and expertise comes with time. That's just a general truism, I think. So take the time, immerse yourself in the technology, and hopefully you walk away with that knowledge. The expertise, though, it just takes time and hands-on experience. Now, the ownership and control component to this. I mentioned kind of how I feel about controlling my own destiny, my own environment, specifically my computing environment. And the discussion may have already taken place where you've already had high-level conversations and you know what you're going to do and what solution works best for you and what provider you're already going to go with. Or maybe even here in 2020, maybe you have a startup company, or whatever the case may be, you're a spin-off from parent enterprise, and you're just thinking through what's the smartest way to do this? How can we leverage the in-house team and expertise that currently exists to accomplish the goals and objectives of the business? So that's where a huge piece of this is going to be cost of ownership, the ROI, and there's a little image here that I grabbed from somewhere. Hardware costs, software costs. You can take all this stuff into consideration when you think through how much is it going to cost? Because licenses and support and maintenance fees and the training component, all these things cost money and time is money. Any business savvy person out there understands that. Time is money. And arguably you're going to be spending time on something anyway. Your engineers, your analysts, and your whatever titles you've given people on your team are going to be focusing their efforts somewhere. Do you want them focusing them on your on-prem solution or the cloud solution? And quite frankly, there is another kind of component to that conversation here that comes into play, and that is enticing your employees. Or if you're trying to grow, what type of employees are you trying to hire in? Some folks nowadays are looking at more of the, I want to grow my skill sets. There's this conception that everyone's using these cloud environments and these cloud components, and having it on their resume is a selling point. So that's perhaps a bit outside this conversation, but something to keep in mind, where to grow your team and to keep that expertise in-house, you may want to have some cloud offerings just because of not only does it make sense to do, but because that's how you're going to keep and retain the best people. Weird, but not inaccurate, I don't think. Pros and cons, there's definitely some pros and cons. There's a lot of new technology out there and a lot of ways to screw things up. The first portion of this conversation was really about, here's a lot of things that have gone wrong. There's a lot of mistakes that were made, and a lot of that was just human error, lack of education, lack of knowledge, lack of depth, lack of training. That's what I'm trying to convey here. It does take that concerted effort of getting in there, getting your hands dirty, understanding how things work, and really being that expert, owning your success, owning that knowledge that comes along with it. The last thing here is really simplicity. I'm a huge proponent of keeping things as simple as you possibly can. Now, complexity breeds insecurity. I Googled that because I thought it was like could be maybe a cool image I could include here, but it's not even that common of a saying apparently. I don't know if I invented it or what, but I've heard that a lot. I think maybe insecurity is the right terminology, but the more complex something is, the more difficult it is to secure. That's the point here. So if you can simplify anything in your personal life or your professional technology stack, typically you're going to have a higher level of security. And that's a critical component to this. We see in today's society, people still shop at Target despite the breach, and Home Depot despite the breach. And we don't have enough time to go into all the different breaches where people still go shopping there or use the service and don't really think twice about it. But we don't always hear about the monetary component, how much those companies got fined. Now, us in security, perhaps we are staying abreast of that information. A lot of people don't, though. It's like, oh, yeah, Target got breached. So what? That costs a lot of money. It may hurt the reputation, but there's definitely, especially nowadays, a financial impact associated with that breach. When negligence is involved, or even when it's difficult to prove, there is a breach. It could be even another country coming after you for GDPR. It could be, the list kind of, I'm going to stop right there with it. The point is, your company may literally pay the price for the mistakes that you make, which nothing wrong with that, I don't think. Reduce complexity is the point. Document what you're doing, how it's being done. think through potential scenarios where you could have some issues. Threat modeling. It all comes down to threat modeling, where you're putting on kind of an adversarial hat, so to speak, and thinking through, if I was an adversary, how would I finish the sentence? How would I cause harm to the business? How would I take this service down? How would I gain access to the PII? How would I launch this attack? How would I exploit this vulnerability? And what are the ramifications of those actions? And thinking through, geez, is this so complex that there's only one person on the entire team that knows how to do this? And if she gets sick, we're out of luck. How well is stuff documented? And once again, or perhaps for the first time, if you and your team can't explain the details of how something works, that probably should be a red flag. That is way too complicated. Think about that. Things are complex. The world is complex. Counting votes is apparently pretty complex. Can't even. Never mind. Nothing's going to change as far as complexity goes. So the ideal solution here is to create the best team. This is not a one-person type of solution in most cases. Depending how big the organization is, it certainly plays into it. But the complexity isn't really going to go anywhere. It's going to keep on getting more complex with more terminology and more acronyms and more technology and so on. Embrace it, understand it, do the best that you can, keep your education and your knowledge on point, and understand that there's some challenges of getting from point A to point B. But with those challenges come rewards. That's me. That's my talk. And I think we're going to open up to questions and answers. So thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks for that great presentation. We don't have any questions at this time. However, if anyone has any questions, please enter it into the questions window now. While we wait, do you have any other closing thoughts, Serge?
Yes. Since there are no questions, that's a clear indicator that I did an excellent job with this talk and I've answered all the questions. That's my takeaway from this. No, I think I covered most of the stuff I want to talk about. Other than that, just to reiterate, I am available if there's anything in most cases that I can do to answer your questions or to help you along your journey through your professional career, your choices you're going to make from a security or IT perspective. I like to have those conversations from time to time, and be a member of the cyber or information security community. So I'm available, and don't hesitate to reach out with questions, comments, conversations, whatever I can do to help. I like to usually do that.
All right, great. Thank you. One did come in. It mentions, how would an IT team or security team provide financial details on the cost of the move to cloud?
Okay. So the question really sounds like, if we're going to move to the cloud, how can we get some details on how much it's going to cost? The answer to that is, depending which cloud provider you want to go with. I can speak to AWS. They have a fairly robust cost calculator built into their infrastructure, or their interface, I should say. You can use that to not just get some clear indicators of how much you're going to be billed per month, but also the expected costs over time, given the technology that you choose to implement. So there's a GUI built into their offering, and I'd say go ahead and leverage that. The other side, of course, is the physical. If you're not in the cloud right now, then you may already have those numbers to kind of compare and contrast. Otherwise, it's just making phone calls and going to people's websites and saying how much is this going to cost from an ISP perspective and an insurance perspective. And then, of course, the human cost. That's the other thing that maybe sounds weird as I say it out loud, but salary, how much are you going to pay people? Sometimes there's a premium associated with, a cloud engineer versus a non-cloud engineer. So keep that in mind, especially depending where you're hiring your people from. I know a lot of people are remote right now, but if you're hiring someone in New York or San Francisco, that's going to go for a lot more than potentially someone in another part of the country. So salary definitely is a huge piece of this, that the cost of obtaining, retaining, and training employees is something I want you to focus in on, because the other answers that are provided as far as the GUI and AWS, it's a straightforward answer, and there's a straightforward black and white, here's how much the stuff costs. And that's not too terribly difficult to obtain those numbers. But the soft costs, those are the more challenging sometimes.
All right, great, thank you. Well, those are all the questions that we have. Thank you to our speaker, Serge, for that great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.
Thank you. Goodbye.